Back to the basics. Sunglasses, check. Hat, check. Notes, check. Pepsi, check. Sources, check. And thick skin, check. Let's go. Welcome to Go to Blue, everybody. If you're a college football fan, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. We are on our way to 10,000 subscribers. So we would greatly appreciate it if you hit that like and subscribe button and help us get to 10,000 subscribers. You know, whenever I first heard that ESPN was going after Clemson, Florida State, North Carolina, and Virginia, of course, I agreed with Clemson and Florida State and North Carolina, but that last slot, Virginia, I didn't quite understand why the SEC wanted Virginia. I thought there were bigger brands, bigger revenue-making brands than Virginia. So the biggest excuse that people kept giving me was that they wanted to bring in a rival for North Carolina and the SEC didn't want Duke. So, you know, it made sense to me, but it still just didn't feel right. It didn't quite fit in my eyes, and that's just my opinion. Well, now it's come out that Dan Patrick thinks that the SEC has actually changed their mind. The SEC now actually wants to go after Clemson, Florida State, and Miami, possibly another team. Remember, the divisions rule is out the window. You don't have to bring in an even amount of teams for it to make sense now. You don't have to have divisions to have a conference championship if you have 12 or more members. So they could just bring in Clemson, Florida State, and Miami. And y'all know me, I'm a West Virginia fan, but I have been advocating that the SEC should get Miami. I mean, it just makes too much sense to me. I know Florida only wants one more Florida team in there, but Miami's a big brand, and it's going to hurt the SEC recruiting because it'll take away the SEC factor. Yeah, but eventually that's not even going to matter anyways because you're going to break away from the NCAA, create your own playoffs and national championship. So you might as well get the biggest brands available, brands that are going to make you the most money, and Miami is definitely one of the biggest brands in the ACC. If you're going after the ACC, then Miami has to be on the list. Now, if you're going with the combination between two different conferences, then the SEC could get Clemson, Florida State, and some teams out of the Big 12. But if you're strictly focused on the ACC, then Miami has to be in the conversation. I think the U has a great brand, especially when it comes to brand recognition. I think Mario Cristobal is going to have Miami being in the headlines consistently, even this year. I think Miami will contend for the ACC championship. But if they do want to add one more team, who else would they bring in with Clemson, Florida State, and Miami? Well, you could stick with North Carolina, but I don't think North Carolina is going to the SEC. Well, there's Virginia. They were on the list. I don't think Virginia is going to the SEC. I think the best brand that the SEC should get with Clemson, Florida State, and Miami would be Louisville. Not a lot of people are talking about Louisville. I know their academics aren't that great, but we're talking about brand recognition, TV revenue, and fan base size, and Louisville checks all the boxes. I think Louisville would fit right in. I know the SEC already has Kentucky, so they already have the Kentucky market. Yeah, but Louisville is a separate entity. That's a big city that has their own fan base, so Louisville does bring a lot of value to the table whenever it comes to the SEC. Now, from the beginning, as far as the teams out of the ACC that could be going to the Big Ten, I've always thought it was going to be North Carolina, Virginia, Virginia Tech, and then either Pitt, Syracuse, or maybe a Georgia Tech. I think North Carolina, Virginia, and Virginia Tech make too much sense. You'd have to figure out whether it's going to be Pitt, Syracuse, or Georgia Tech that would join them. That's why I didn't understand the list that the SEC was going after North Carolina and Virginia. I always thought that they would be a better fit in the Big Ten. So the Big Ten needs to grab those three teams at least, and then if they want to add one more, they could add a Pitt, Syracuse, maybe a Georgia Tech. The brand that has the biggest focus from the Big Ten right now is Notre Dame. They could be that fourth brand. It could be North Carolina, Virginia, Virginia Tech, and Notre Dame. Dan Patrick seems to think that Fox and NBC are trying to work together to bring in Notre Dame to the Big Ten. I don't know how ironclad that contract that Notre Dame has with the ACC is, because in that contract it says if Notre Dame joins a conference before 2036, it has to be the ACC. But they're not a full-time member in football. Maybe they could stay a member in the ACC and all the other sports, and then in football they could join the Big Ten. But we also know that Notre Dame wants to stay independent if they can reach that $75 million a year payout. So if they can't reach that $75 million a year, they might have to join the Big Ten because that would be their best option. All their other sports, if they want to stay in the ACC, that's fine. No problem there. Football in the Big Ten. And to me, that makes the most sense. Notre Dame in the Big Ten, that's where most of the rivalries are, especially when you bring in USC. And you could bring in Stanford later on if that would entice Notre Dame. So I think the four teams at the Big Ten need to focus on number one, Notre Dame, first and foremost. If you got to bring in Stanford to bring in Notre Dame, so be it. Then you'd have to cut down the list of other teams down to 2. But if you don't have to bring in Stanford, then you can bring in North Carolina, Virginia, and Virginia Tech with Notre Dame. That makes a lot of sense. I'm guessing all this stuff is getting figured out behind closed doors. I wasn't buying North Carolina and Virginia to the SEC from the beginning. Hey, maybe it still happens. I don't know. I just don't think they're a good fit. I think the best fit for the SEC would be Clemson, Florida State, Miami, and Louisville. Or if the SEC is dead set on having a footprint in the state of North Carolina, instead of going after North Carolina, they could go after NC State. We all know that NC State is not as big of a brand as North Carolina, but I just think North Carolina is a better fit in the Big Ten, and it would make more sense for the SEC to go after Clemson, Florida State, Miami, and either Louisville or NC State. The feedback that I've gotten from SEC fans is they definitely don't want Louisville. They already have Kentucky, so they already have that footprint in Kentucky. So if you want to take Louisville off the board, that's fine, and keep the footprint of North Carolina. There you go. NC State could be the answer for that. So the 4 teams that would best fit into the SEC might be Clemson, Florida State, Miami, and NC State. And the 4 best teams that would fit the best in the Big Ten moving forward, of course, number 1, Notre Dame. Then if you don't have to bring in Stanford, then you bring in North Carolina, Virginia, and Virginia Tech. That's what makes the most sense to me. And it seems like that's what Dan Patrick thinks as well. Now, I'm not saying he knows what's going on behind the scenes or anything like that. I just thought it was an interesting take on his part, and I think he's dead on. I think he's right about this. Everything about all these teams, as far as Clemson, Florida State, Miami, and Louisville, or NC State, they would fit perfectly in the SEC. Then those other 3 teams I mentioned, North Carolina, Virginia, Virginia Tech with Notre Dame, that would be a perfect fit for the Big Ten. So y'all let me know in the comments section what you think about this. Does this make more sense than what we've been hearing in the past as far as the SEC going after Clemson, Florida State, North Carolina, and Virginia? In my opinion, it does, and I think those schools actually belong in the Big Ten when it comes to the Virginia schools and North Carolina. And I want to get y'all's opinion on the battle for that last spot for the SEC. Do you think it would be Louisville or NC State that would fit in the best with Clemson, Florida State, and Miami? At first, I was thinking Louisville, but the SEC does have that footprint in the state of Kentucky with Kentucky. Their initial list revealed that they did have North Carolina along with Virginia, with Clemson and Florida State, so maybe they do want that footprint in the state of North Carolina. If North Carolina goes to the Big Ten, then the next best thing would be NC State. Which one has the higher value to fill in that last spot would be NC State or Louisville? And not just for the sake of filling a spot, because remember, that rule is not in place anymore. They don't have to have an even amount of teams to have a conference championship. So they could just bring in Clemson, Florida State, and Miami. So should the SEC even try to fill that last spot with NC State or Louisville? Do they bring enough value to fill that spot? Or maybe the SEC turns to the Big 12 for that last spot. I don't know. But if it comes down to Louisville and NC State, which one has the better value? Which one would fit in the SEC the most? And look, I'm not even saying that all this is going to happen in this particular offseason. Conference realignment might be over for this offseason, but these new TV deals are due by 2023 and 2024, and the Big Ten and the SEC want to figure out what gives them the most value so they can negotiate for the biggest contract. So make no mistake about it, this conference realignment thing is not done, not by a long shot. We might have to wait till the next offseason to see the next wave, but there will be more teams jumping from one Power 5 conference to another Power 5 conference. There's just too much money at stake here. That's all I got for you for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.